Hello, BookTube, it's Roz and
Alf.
hi, and we're here to do the Brandon Sanderson Tag, and I was kindly tagged by Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics. And when I thought, oh, I've never read any Brandon Sanderson. How am I going to do that tag? And then I realised that I have my very own household Brandon Sanderson expert.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as expert, but yeah, certainly.
Well, in household terms, I've never read him at all, and you might have read a Sanderson or two.
I've read all of the Cosmere stuff and his Wheel of Time books, but not any of his young adult stuff.
So that's what?
I don't know, like 15 books.
About 15 books. Okay. So, how can I waste the opportunity to do a tag with Alf?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like it'd be fun.
I hope so. So, the questions. I'll start with the first one.
Absolutely, that sounds good.
Oh, I should say that this tag was created by Christy Lewis, and she's doing a whole
I think she called it Storm
Along thing, which is brilliant. Not my cup of tea, but
you should give it a try. Well, the books you don't have them because I've lent them to a friend, so you
because they were that good, you wanted someone else to read them.
Exactly.
So thanks, Christy, for coming up with these very interesting questions. Yeah. Question number 1. Brandon wrote many early novels while working as a night clerk at a Provo hotel. What book kept you reading late into the night? Well, I have a feeling you have quite a few answers.
So it's more like which book didn't keep me reading late into the night. I have a bad habit of once I've started a book, if I'm more than about a third in, I won't stop until I finished it. So every book I read keeps me late into the night. But for a particular sort of strong example for these books, we're going to go with the last 3 Wheel of Time books, which is where Brandon Sanderson took over from writing from Robert Jordan because he unfortunately passed away. And I have to say, I think you saw how much book that was. I did the whole thing in about 48 hours with maybe 3 hours of sleep overall. So
it's an outrage and a disgrace. Okay, well, I'm these days less in the habit of reading half the night, partly because there's someone else in the room who might object. But I did think of one example where it did keep me awake late, and that's My Name is Red by Orhan Pamuk. Now, the reason being, if you've read any Pamuk, you will know that his books are wonderful but quite complex.
Sure.
And like engrossing, but it's really easy to kind of get confused or lose a thread. And this one keeps jumping from character to character.
See, I think there's 2 sorts of people that end up reading late into the night. Like there's this book is complicated, and once I've toggled in, I don't want to toggle out.
That's it.
Versus for me, it's very much I'm like this plot has strong forward momentum and is carrying me through.
Well, but this was both because actually it's a bit of a thriller, like a whodunit. You start by hearing from the dead person, and then you get all these different characters. And so I did think, if I'm going to get the fun I should out of this sort of the dramatic denouement of the thriller side of the plot, which is set in 16th century Istanbul, actually, so you probably like it.
Maybe.
That I've got to stick with it, so I had to read all night to get to the end. There you go.
Question 2.
Brandon's
complex magic systems set his fantasy apart. What subject do you love to read about in all its complexity?
Right. Quick answer from me, this one.
Sure.
I've got quite an interest these days in reading books about migration.
Sure.
And people who emigrate or displaced, or it's like novels in particular that address that really interest me a lot. Yeah. What about you?
I've copped out on this one, which is like lots of things interest me and I want to read into the complexity, and it will change day to day and week to week and month to month. I'll be like, oh, like this is like I'll just go on a maths binge or a history binge or a mythology or just a reading or whatever. Or there's the thing I'll be like, I just want to go on this thing really hard, and then I'll get bored and move on to something else.
Which is why you can be having a conversation with you and something like, I don't know, the medieval German city-states come up, and you're
the Hamburg versus Magdeburg.
And you're right, yes. So that's
probably
you all over.
History more than anything else, but just anything really.
Yeah, science too.
Whatever I'm currently fixated on.
Yeah. Question 3. Brandon gets book ideas from watching other storytellers fail to execute a concept well. Interesting. He figures out how to do it better. What 2 books handle the same concept in strikingly different ways, and which did you prefer?
So not strictly 2 books, but like a series and then a set of books by an author. I think The Rivers of London by Ben Aranovich versus pretty much everything China Mabel's written, but especially stuff like Kraken and King Rat.
Yeah.
So these are both books that are sort of, well, sets of books that are exploring what if London but weird and magic.
Yeah.
And then using that as a way to look at like London issues and social issues in the country. But obviously they're very, very different in their presentation. Like China's very oblique and weird and kind of tangled up and complicated, whereas the Aronoviches are like, it's your Wallander or your detective story just with some magic and folklore slapped on top. So it's like
good, clean fun.
Oh, they are absolutely good, clean fun. They're fantastic. There's a new one out that we need to get and read.
How exciting! But Mieville is
there's that beautiful prose and complicated ideas.
He's like your classy writer, and whereas this is like kind of
airport fiction.
But we've read everyone and we've loved them.
Yeah.
So okay, well mine's slightly sort of less jolly choice, I suppose, because now where's my book to wave? I'm going to pick Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov and Putney by Sofka Zinoviev. Have I got that right? Yes, Zinoviev. And they're both books about like men having sexual relationships with
inappropriate sexual relationships with
young girls. Sort of like just on the kind of prepubescent turn of puberty, and everybody knows Lolita, so I won't say much about that. And it's a really, really well written book, and some people sometimes talk about it as like one of the best books of the 20th century and so on. I have to say I actually preferred Putney in many ways because it explores the impact on the girl better in a way. It's kind of got a more feminine perspective, I suppose.
I've not read either and don't really have any inclination.
No,
that sounds reasonable.
I don't think you'd find either particularly enjoyable or appealing. But if you out there have read Lolita, do read Putney. I think you'll find it interesting. The sort of she doesn't think of herself as a victim until much later in life was interesting. Anyway, onward.
As a child, Brandon was recommended to read several books which included dogs dying. As a result, he became quite reluctant in reading until exposed to fantasy slightly later in life. Please share a good or bad formative childhood reading experience.
My turn to go first.
Okay.
Yeah, and the obviously the dog in the question kind of did some sort of word association for me, because the good childhood reading experience that I want to pick is reading Gerald Durrell's books about animals, and the first one he wrote was My Family and Other Animals, and all about the weird pets and wild animals that he adopted as a child in Corfu, and then he becomes obviously a kind of an animal collector and runs a zoo, and the reason they were a good experience is they were really funny. But I think because it was at the point when I got a bit bored of books for children, and these weren't written for children, but they were entirely accessible to an older child.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and animals. I mean, animals and humour, and why not?
Yeah. So I've got here, which we may get a look of shock from Roz on this one. So when I was younger, my beloved mother and father would read to me and my sister in bed, sort of like a chapter a day of books.
Yes.
And one such book that was engaged in this read along was The Amber Spyglass, and the entirety of His Dark Materials. Now, this is the first book where I cheated.
What?
So I saw the contents page had Lyra and her death on it, and when we were on about chapter 16, I was like, okay, well, I know that's there, so I took it from where it was on beside the bed to be read that evening, and read ahead to double check that Lyra wouldn't die.
I'm shocked to my core.
But just like I don't know, I have a habit of reading ahead of where I should, particularly during sort of high school English classes where the books were at a level that was well below me, and this is to that good experience of this is so exciting I can't stop myself, to a bad experience of just reading books that are well below my reading level in high school English and being like, oh no, you have to read only this far ahead, and I've already finished the book by the end of the first like lesson when we're meant to only have read up to chapter 1 because someone's reading slowly in the corner of the class, and I just like.
Oh, you know, well, I completely empathise with this, and actually, do you know that my family and other animal story that I told was, I think, part of my frustration was that in the primary school I was at the time, there was like a shelf of books that you were allowed to read, and you weren't allowed. There was this library full of books, but you weren't allowed to read anything other than the shelf that was designated for your age
I
group.
got special dispensation to read up, probably because of you leaning on.
Yeah, because I went in and thought, I'm not having. Yes, no, you never got troubled with that sort of nonsense. Yeah. Okay. So next question. Is it my turn?
It is. I think your turn.
Is it my turn? Yes. Okay. So where are we? Question 5. Brandon and several friends host the Writing Excuses podcast, and they frequently invite guests. Please tell us about the collaborative fiction project and what you thought of it.
So I've got sort of.
Have you got a decent answer for this? Because my answer's rubbish.
I've got two interconnected, well, almost three interconnected, and I think reasonable answers on this. Mm-hmm. So from like a straight collaborative fictional book project, which I really got a lot of value out at the time. We have got The Edge Chronicles by Paul Stewart and Chris Riddell. I've got like a little World Book Day one, but all of them are like this. And these books, like Paul Stewart did all the writing, Chris Riddell did all the illustrations, and the illustrations are beautiful and in many ways just as important as the words.
Absolutely.
And it just creates this vivid imagery of this world that you otherwise wouldn't. It makes it so much more realised and exciting. And it definitely does feel like it was a strong, these were favourite books when we were young. We went to book signings, and we know that it was a very they're a local author and artist, and they're very collaborative project.
Paul Stewart's wife was your
teacher.
Teacher at primary school.
Yes, exactly. I think the last third of the series we didn't buy. They got given to us.
Yes, because you were such appreciative readers. Yes, so, I think your collaboration in that project was by being an enthusiastic reader who commented and a test reader.
Yes, and I guess the other collaborative fiction thing that I'm quite involved with is role-playing games, both sort of tabletop and live-action ones. Particularly at times in the past at university, I was running games, and that involved, working with ref teams to sort of both write the plot of this event that people would be interacting with, and then writing up the consequences of the things that the players had done and how that would affect their world that they were in, both in terms of kind of collaborating with what the players had done and with the other people on the game running team about how to respond to that in a way that would create a fun and engaging experience. And so that's like me doing collaborative fiction, and I can't really talk about any of it because there's no way for anyone that didn't participate in those games to know what had happened, but it's a very different way to sort of think about a fictional world or set of events. And it's very enjoyable.
Yeah. It's like it kind of is how you express your storytelling kind of abilities. I think I'm not sure I've ever really taken part in any kind of collaborative sort of writing
read
project.
Books with multiple authors?
Yeah, no, but I mean, I was thinking in terms of the doing as opposed to the reading.
Sure.
If you know what I mean. And as collaborators I've got is like party games and sort of Christmas things where you we're doing that thing where you start a story and the next person so that's
I think that's like you can see the different interpretations on that question.
True.
So question 6, Brandon's first book, White Sand, was rewritten and converted into a graphic novel by the same name. What's a book that you'd like to see done in a different format?
Well, now my answer for this is a book that I'd like to see made into a film.
Sure.
So I think that's
a different format. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the book is The Blue Sky by Gulsan. No, I don't really know how to pronounce his surname. Shinag, I think.
Sure.
Okay, and he's Mongolian, or in fact, more specifically, Tuvan.
Sure. Yeah.
From the Altai Mountains.
Yes.
And he was sort of born in the 1940s, and he's Blue Sky is like a sort of semi-autobiographical novel about his kind of young child, like being a young boy in the Altai Mountains, living in yurts. Well, they're not really called yurts, are they?
Ger, I think.
Ger is a proper name, isn't it?
Yurt is the circle left in the ground where the tent had been.
But the translator yes. So, with like herds and his relationship with his grandmother, and it's just this like the mountains, the sky, the views, the weather, the seasons are so much part of the book that I found myself wishing I could see it.
Sure, it's got that.
It was a very, very visual book, and you
Yeah.
could really see it would make and
slow film with lots of panning landscapes.
absolutely, but also with this sort of looming whatever, because of course
the Russian Civil War is going to cause horrible things.
Exactly, and to they all get sent off to school, or they're suppressed, and also you just have the potential for the best soundtrack, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't get enough of that Mongolian sort of Altai type throat singing. So.
Absolutely, we're big fans of that.
Yeah.
So there we go. That's my choice. What about you?
So so I was thinking about this from a couple of things. The first one obviously is that speaking of Wheel of Time, there's a TV show for that in development at the moment, and I'm very excited to give that a watch, because I think that would be very interesting to see that sort of versus like something like Game of Thrones, which is quite a gritty fantasy. Wheel of Time's a much more kind of classic high fantasy story, and seeing that in a television medium, seeing if they can land that as a TV show rather than say the Lord of the Ringsy movie, should be fascinating.
Yes.
The kind of other way round thing, recently I watched the Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra TV shows, and then read the comics and the Avatar Kyoshi book, and it's like kind of fascinating because it's like the same setting and like the same kind of creative team, but very being in the book rather than as a children's cartoon lets them make some kind of quite different kind of creative and directorial choices, which sort of presents that world from a different angle and perspective. So it's like, again, it's the idea that how much the medium matters and changes things.
Yeah, that's
But obviously they're not straight adaptations because they're different characters in different time periods of the world. But
no, that's interesting. You're almost making me think I'd find it interesting to.
I don't know. Probably
not. Question 7. Oh, shorter one. Brandon writes very quickly. Well, he must to write such quantities. What prolific author or authors would you recommend?
So,
your
Brandon Sanderson, first of all, easy.
You'd recommend him?
Yeah.
You would, wouldn't you?
But I think in terms of the combination of prolificity and recommendaciousness, it's got to be Sir Terry Pratchett, GNU. He's probably my all-time favourite author. Obviously, there's like 40 Discworld books plus, well, not quite 40, plus all of his other stuff. And they're great and they're funny, and he was churning them out. He slows down a bit in later life because of the health issues that killed him, but they're just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and I must say, you encouraged me to give one a go, and it was brilliant.
I don't think
of the authors like you've kind of recommended, with Shawn is one that I've enjoyed, and Pratchett surprised me by being another. Yeah.
Well, I think he does that. The thing that is the best thing that fantasy can do, where he uses it as a way to look at real world issues from a slightly different angle, with like the softening of the fantastic world and the humour means that you can approach sort of difficult topics in a way that's still fun and friendly and accessible.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Come back again on question 9.
Oh yes. So, well, for me, okay, your best prolific authors are basically all 19th century blokes.
I'm being paid by the word count for this magazine.
Yeah, like Dickens.
Yes.
Yeah. But the one I'm going to pick is Anthony Trollope. Here are 2 of his Barchester Towers series. The Barchester novels, superb. He wrote, I have no idea how many books he wrote. Monstrous. Really,
sure.
He absolutely would give Brandon Sanderson more than a run for his money. Yeah. And but that everyone I've read has been bloody good. Yeah, there you go.
Very reasonable.
Next question. Is it my turn? No, it's your turn.
No, it is your turn, isn't it?
No, it's yours.
Oh, right. Okay. So
Brandon's Cosmere universe.
Yeah, so the Cosmere setting for his books is grounded to an extent in Platonic philosophy, or at least you could interpret it as being like that. There's like a lot of possible philosophical origins, I think, to my reading. Maybe he's actually said in an interview that yes, it's intended to be based on Platonic ideals, and I can certainly see that there's a strong theme there. But so what's a book or series that gets you really excited about underlying source material?
Okay, the book I've picked for this is Pure by Andrew Miller. Okay, relatively recent book. 2011. And it's historical fiction, but what I loved about this book, okay, the main protagonist in this book is an engineer, and it's Paris, it's 1785, and he has been given the sort of engineering-y challenge, logistical challenge of clearing the
Catacombs.
medieval cemetery in
Sure.
the middle of Paris, Les Innocents, that is kind of polluting the whole like city around it, and it's just full of kind of like
18th century engineering challenges
and bones. and it's just like reading it. I was reading it thinking, did this really happen? It's like, so source material was just to take that source material and write what is a very, very good novel. I thought was a triumph.
I don't really have a good answer for this one. A lot of the time when I've read a book and it has interesting ideas in it, I'll latch onto that and then read it on. But I can't think of any sort of specific examples. I'd say particularly like historical inspirations or mythological inspirations are something that will definitely drive me to then go and do background reading.
Yeah.
But
I
don't have a book to wave
about that. No book to wave, but it's something that you do. It's almost like you do it so much that you can't pick one, isn't it? Yeah. Question 9. Brandon loves to show multiple sides of every issue and to contrast character values. Please share a book that handles controversy well. Over to you.
So, as I say, I think that there's a couple of Discworld books that handle sort of controversial issues really well, and that's why we sort of like linked through from the other one. So this is Night Watch, which is about kind of police authority and protest and civil unrest, and it's done in a way that's like really kind of quite careful and clever and sort of very tightly put together and effective. And obviously that's quite a contentious and recent and relevant issue. And the book's from a while ago, but it's like, yes, it's that the way that the main character of that book is a lawman, but nevertheless can understand where the law is failing or evil, and then take actions to promote actual justice versus what's legal. And it's just very sort of clever and effective, I think.
Yeah. And it's interesting how like kind of science fiction and fantasy can kind of lend itself to being used for exploring issues. It's like taking things out of their normal context. Gives you the chance.
It can also be done in a way that's very blind to issues. You get a lot of these fantasy books which essentially are like effectively pro-authoritarian might makes right sort of setups just because of the way they're sort of chosen one narratives like line up. It's like, yes, the good king, etc. is not all like it's not necessarily a helpful trope, but it is a very present one. The other Pratchett that does a kind of controversial issue really well that I can't wave around because I lent it to someone and never got it back is Small Gods, which sort of looks at the difference between sort of faith as a source of strength and comfort and faith as a source of power and control and oppression.
Very relevant.
And
interesting. Always relevant. Has been since
forever
actually. Now, when I started thinking about this question, I kind of I was tempted to pick like Shakespeare or something because it's just like there's so many ways that you could go. So in the end, because I was struggling, I went with a non-fiction book, and that's Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and he wrote that in 2014. It's his doctor, but it's a book about end of life care, and like how we have become not very good at dealing with death.
Sure.
And then he just quite sensitively and thoughtfully, but nevertheless quite kind of boldly goes for it in expressing his views about sort of how we should deal with end of life and not kind of dragging things out. And I suppose he's from an American context, so it's like even more of a problem there, I think, than here.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. So and I found it quite
interesting.
A book that I actually sort of
gave you thoughts that you didn't have before.
Yeah, or took them a little bit further. Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Oh. So question 10. Brandon Sanderson does a writing lecture at BYU about writing science fiction and fantasy, and unlike some sort of teaching or writing systems, all of those lectures go online for free. They're really fascinating, worth a watch if you're interested in the genre, or there's a lot of general writing stuff in there as well to an extent.
So you don't have to want to write to watch them. They're interesting.
Yeah, I found them very interesting, certainly.
About the creative process.
Yeah, about the creative process. About also about like the nuts and bolts of writing a book, versus. But the question is, what's a free online literature resource that you're particularly grateful for?
I'll learn that one.
Well, not online necessarily. Any free literature resource that you're grateful for.
Oh,
so
me first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pick the Poetry Foundation, which is brilliant. I will link to it in the description because it's like a website you can go to, and you can search for poems or poets, and they'll bring one up, but also it's got like essays and interpretation and copies of poetry. It's just brilliant. I've actually kind of used it quite a lot when I want to find
more about poems or
poems. Yeah, or just like that half remembered poem that you're trying.
Yeah, track it down through that.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. So I would strongly recommend it if you like poetry. What about you?
So a bit of an outside choice here, but the TV Tropes Wiki, which is a online wiki about, it's not just about TV, it started there, it's about media and like the sort of recurring tropes and ideas in it, and you'll go to the page for a given book or series, and it'll have a list of what the editors think are tropes that are prevalent in that series, or character pages with the tropes that those characters have, and then those tropes themselves will have pages which kind of have like a detailed explanation of what's this idea and how is it represented, and then here's a bunch of media that it's present in. And almost always when I've finished a book or a series, I'll pop on TV Tropes and have a little read through. It's a very good way to get like a kind of generalized set of opinions and connections and patterns that other people have noticed and recognized as a sort of starting off point for having further thoughts about it.
That is unexpectedly fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's our tag.
That's the tag.
Now what we're meant to do now is tag other booktubers.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know any other booktubers.
Yes, you know one.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll tag totally Tilly's shelf. There we go.
There you go, because that's the
she's
one.
She's my sister. I'm allowed.
I'm gonna tag. Oh, gosh, I had someone in my head, and laughing about Tilly has knocked it right out. So, I know. I'm gonna I'll put some in the description instead.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Farewell,
Farewell.
people.
Goodbye.